Nellie felt the bass in her chest as she ran down the narrow back corridor of Club Noir. Behind her, the door burst open. "Nellie." Jack's voice cut through the night. "Stop running," he said. "You're embarrassing yourself." One man stepped in front of her. Another moved behind her. Jack walked forward slowly, buttoning his jacket. She was trapped. "Come back inside and do your job," he said quietly. "Or I call immigration about that little problem with your visa." Panic surged through her. She shoved the man blocking her path and screamed into the empty street. "Help me. Somebody please help me." One of Jack's men grabbed her arm. When she kept fighting, he struck her hard across the face. Her head snapped sideways. She tasted blood. Across the narrow street, a black car sat in the shadows. A tall Korean man leaned against it, arms folded, watching. Nellie met his eyes. "Please," she said. "Save me." The man pushed off the car and walked toward them with his hands in his pockets. Jack's expression shifted, not fear, but calculation. "This is a private matter," Jack said. The man glanced at the blood on Nellie's lip. Then he hit the guard once. The guard collapsed instantly. He stepped forward again. Jack barely had time to straighten his jacket before the second punch landed. The Korean man straightened his coat. He looked at Jack the way you look at something you have already stopped thinking about. Then he turned to Nellie. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him. "Thank you so much?" He didn't answer. He looked at the mark on her face and then at the alley behind her. Before we continue with the story, I'd like to welcome you to my channel, Afro-Korean Mafia series by Jasmine. To everyone returning, welcome back, and to our new viewers, I'm glad you're here. Kindly like, subscribe, and join our growing community. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because this story is only just getting started. Jack made a small sound of irritation. "You bastard. You have no idea who I am. I know exactly who you are." The man finally looked at Jack directly. Something passed between them in that moment that Nellie did not fully understand. Some recognition that went beyond two strangers arguing in a Seoul alley at 11 at night. "And you know who I am. So let's save each other the explanation." Jack's jaw tightened. He looked at Nellie, and then at the two men standing behind the Korean man, and then back at the Korean man's face. The calculation behind his eyes was visible. "This isn't finished," Jack said quietly to Nellie. "It is finished," the man replied before Nellie could speak. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. "Don't contact her again." Jack held his gaze for another moment. Then he turned and walked back into the alley, and his two guards followed him, and the fire door closed behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Nellie stood on the pavement, and her legs were shaking. She put a hand against the wall to steady herself and took a long breath through her nose and let it out slowly. Her palm was still bleeding slightly from the scrape against the brick. The man was looking at her. Not the way Jack looked at her. Not the way the men inside Club Noir looked at her. He was looking at her the way a person looks at someone they are genuinely trying to assess, checking for damage, measuring what she needed. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My hand," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Just my hand. I'm okay." He glanced at her hand, then looked up at her face, and for one moment, just one, his eyes stayed on her face a second longer than strictly necessary. Then he looked away. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked. She opened her mouth and closed it again. The apartment Jack had provided was in his name. Her own things were there, but the lease was his and the key was his, and she had exactly 9,001 in her phone case, and a phone at 40% battery, and a sequin dress that was made for a stage and not for a Seoul November night. "No," she said. He did not comment on that. He nodded once and turned and walked back toward the black car and opened the rear passenger door and waited. Nellie looked at the open door. She looked at the man holding it open. She thought about what she knew about Korean mafia bosses and late-night alleys and men who made other men back down without raising their voices. And then she thought about Jack Walsh, and she got in the car. His name was Junho. She did not learn that immediately. For the first 20 minutes of the drive, she sat in the back seat pressed against the door with her scraped hand in her lap and her eyes forward. And he sat on the other side of the seat with a full body's width between them, looking at his phone. The two men were in the front. The city slid past the windows. Nobody spoke. She caught herself looking at him once during that drive. Just briefly, just a sideways glance, at the line of his jaw and the way he held his phone and the particular stillness of his hands. She looked away quickly. He did not appear to notice. But a few minutes later, In the reflection of the dark window beside her, she saw him glance at her. Just once. Just for a second. Then he went back to his phone. He eventually told her his name in the way you hand someone a tool they need for a job, simply and without ceremony. He asked for hers in the same tone. Nellie, she said. Nellie Okafor. He nodded. He did not attempt to anglicize it or stumble over it. He simply accepted it and moved on, and she noted that. He brought her to a building in Gangnam that had a lobby with real marble floors and a doorman who nodded at CEO Junho as though his arrival at midnight with a foreign woman in a sequin dress was an ordinary occurrence. There was a guest suite on the 4th floor. It had a bathroom with hot water and a closet with folded clothes in several sizes and a kitchen stocked with things that were easy to prepare at midnight. You can stay as long as you need, Junho said, standing in the doorway. He had not crossed the threshold. There is a doctor who can look at your hand in the morning if you want. His number is on the kitchen counter. Thank you, Nellie said. She was standing in the middle of the room with her arms crossed against the cold that was still in her bones. I mean it. Thank you. He looked at her for a moment. His eyes moved across her face with that same quiet assessment from the alley, and she stood very still under it because there was nothing threatening in it, and yet it was not nothing either. Get some rest, he said, and then he left. She stood in the quiet of the room for a long moment. Then she went to the bathroom and washed the scrape on her hand under warm water and sat on the edge of the bathtub and finally, with the door locked and no one watching, let herself shake. She sent him a message at 2 a.m. because she could not sleep. She had gotten his number from the slip of paper beside the doctor's contact on the kitchen counter. She typed the message 3 times before she sent it, changing the wording each time, trying to find the right level of formality for a man who had just walked into an alley and made a British crime boss step back. The message she finally sent said, "This is Nellie. I don't know if you remember me. I just wanted to say thank you. I know that was a lot to walk into, and you didn't have to. I hope I didn't cause you any problems." She put the phone face down on the pillow and stared at the ceiling. The reply came 4 minutes later. I remember you. Don't worry about problems. Sleep. She read it twice. She read it a 3rd time. Then she put the phone down again and, for the first time in weeks, she slept. In the morning he sent a different message. It said, "What kind of work can you do?" Not at the club. Something else. She sat up in bed with the morning light coming through the curtains and read the message and felt something tighten in her chest. Not from fear this time. She typed back, "I have a degree in business administration. I speak English, Igbo, and intermediate Korean. I was working at a logistics company before I ended up at the club." That is a longer story. He replied, "You don't have to explain. I have a position in my company's administrative division. If you want it, it is yours. You can think about it." She stared at the message for a long time. She thought about that. She thought about the 9001 in her phone case, and the clothes in that closet that were not hers, and the apartment she had to collect her things from before Jack changed the locks. She typed, "Okay, I'll try." He sent an address and a time. That was all. While Nellie was pressing her borrowed clothes and trying to figure out if she looked presentable enough for a job interview in a building she did not know, CEO Junho was in a different room entirely. The room was on the top floor of a building in Mapo, and it had no windows that faced the street, and the men seated around the long table were all members of his family, though family in this context meant something that extended far beyond blood. His uncle, Seo Byung-chul, was speaking. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular manner of someone who had spent decades making uncomfortable things sound reasonable. The doctor's assessment was reviewed by 2 other cardiologists, Byung-chul said. He had a folder open in front of him, but he was not reading from it. He had memorized the contents. The condition is progressing. Without a transplant, the timeline is between 4 and 7 months. With the medication, we push it slightly, but the medication is managing symptoms, not solving the problem. The table was quiet. Junho was seated at the head of it. He had a cup of coffee in front of him that had gone cold. His face was arranged in the expression he used for meetings, which was a slight degree removed from his actual feelings on whatever was being discussed. There is also the matter of succession, said another man, Junho's older cousin, Seo Taeyong. He was careful about how he phrased things, always. The family needs continuity. A child. An heir. Given the timeline. I understand the timeline, Junho said. Then you understand the urgency, Byung-chul continued. We can arrange a surrogate. Someone vetted, someone trustworthy. A clean arrangement. The child would be raised in the family and… I have a girlfriend, Junho said. The table went very still. Sujin. Taeyong said carefully. Yes. And the two of you are. We are working on things, Junho said. He picked up the cold coffee and drank some of it and set it back down. I will handle this myself. I don't need a surrogate. His uncle and cousin exchanged a look over the top of his head that they did not quite make invisible enough. Junho saw it. He said nothing about it. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting, and the men around the table gathered their papers and their opinions and filed out. He stood at the head of the empty table for a moment after they had all gone. He put one hand flat on the surface of it and looked at the cold coffee and the empty chairs. Then he picked up his phone and called Sujin. Sujin's apartment was in Itaewon, and she had given him a key 8 months ago, and he used it now, because when he knocked there was no answer, even though her car was in the building garage. He had been calling for 20 minutes. He should have left. That was what he thought later, replaying it. He should have stood outside that door and called one more time, and when she still did not answer, he should have recognized what the silence meant and walked back to his car and waited for a conversation that happened somewhere neutral. But he used the key. She was in the apartment. She was not alone. He did not make a scene. That was not who he was. He stood in the doorway for the length of a breath, long enough to understand completely what he was seeing, and then he put the key on the small table beside the entrance, gently, without a sound, and left. He sat in the back of his car for a long time after that, without telling his driver where to go. His driver, a man named Emeka Okafor, had been driving the Seo family for 15 years. He had driven Junho's father before he had driven Junho. He had a daughter who lived in another country whom he talked about with the particular ache of someone who loves something he cannot get to often enough. He had a way of knowing when Junho needed silence and when he needed something else. Tonight he waited. Just drive, Junho said eventually. Emeka drove. The city moved past the windows and Junho looked at it and did not see it. He thought about Sujin and about the meeting this morning and about the cold coffee and the quiet of the room after his family left. He thought about a woman in a sequined dress who had pressed herself against a car door and said, "Save me," to a stranger. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the number he had given a job to that morning. "I just wanted to say thank you again. And also to ask if you are okay. You don't have to answer that. I just wanted to ask." He stared at the message for a long time. The car moved through Seoul and Emeka drove and did not comment. Junho typed back, "I'm okay. How was your first day?" A minute passed. Then, terrifying. "But I think I did all right. Your HR director is very intense." He almost smiled. He put the phone in his pocket. Outside, the city lights blurred past. 3 days later, he called Nellie and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. He said it in the tone of someone asking something ordinary, which is the only way he ever asked for anything. She said yes. They met at a small place in Yongsan that had good espresso and tables by the window and no one who recognized him. She was already there when he arrived, sitting with her hands around a mug, wearing a coat that was too light for the weather, watching the people pass on the street outside. She looked different in daylight. At the club she had been all stage makeup and borrowed shine. In his lobby that first night she had been shaking and relieved. Now she was just herself, sitting at a table in a coffee shop, and she was beautiful in the way that people are beautiful when they are not performing anything, when they are simply present and unguarded. He stood in the doorway of the cafe for 1 second longer than he needed to before walking toward her table. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and something moved through her expression quickly, something warm that she collected and put away before it fully formed. He sat down across from her. "You're staring," she said. "I was trying to figure out if you were nervous," he said. "I'm always nervous," she said. "I'm just good at looking like I'm not." He ordered coffee. She ordered another of whatever she was drinking. They sat with the noise of the city quiet around them, and she told him things, not everything, but enough. She told him about coming to Korea 3 years ago on a student visa that had run out before she could secure work. She told him about the logistics company that had sponsored her work visa and then let her go without warning when they downsized. She told him about Jack Walsh and how she had ended up at Club Noir and what the debt had looked like on paper and how it had grown every month in ways she did not fully understand until she was already deep in it. She did not ask for sympathy. She stated facts. She looked at the table while she talked and then at his face while she waited for his reaction. He listened. He did not offer commentary. He did not make the face that people sometimes make when they are processing something that makes them uncomfortable. He just listened, and when she finished he said, "I'm glad you got out." She exhaled slowly. "Me too." They were quiet for a moment, and she reached for her mug, and so did he, and their hands nearly touched on the table, just the edge of his fingers brushing the side of hers before she pulled back. She looked at the table. He looked at his coffee. Neither of them said anything about it. "How is the job?" he asked. "Your HR director stopped being terrifying on day 2, she said. "She's actually very funny. She told me you once called her at 4 in the morning to ask where a specific file was, and when she told you it was on your own desk you said thank you and hung up." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "That is exaggerated." She showed me the call log. Something happened to his expression then. It was not a smile exactly, it was more like the almost beginning of one, the slight relaxation around his eyes and mouth, there for a second and then gone. But Nellie saw it, and she felt it somewhere in her chest, warm and unexpected, and she looked quickly at the window so he would not see that she had felt it. They talked for 2 hours. She did not intend to stay that long. When she looked at her watch and registered the time, she apologized, and he waved the apology off, and they walked out onto the street and stood there in the cold, and she said she would see him around. "Yes," he said. She turned to leave. She had taken 3 steps when she heard him say her name. She turned back. He was still standing where she had left him with his hands in his coat pockets, and the cold moving around him, and his eyes on her face. "Be careful going home," he said. It was a simple thing. A small thing. The kind of thing people said to each other every day in every city in the world. But the way he said it, with that particular quietness, with his eyes holding hers just a moment past ordinary, made her chest do something she chose not to examine too closely. "I will," she said. She walked away. She did not look back. But she was still thinking about that almost smile and those 2 words an hour later, on the subway, looking at her reflection in the dark window of the train. It was a Thursday night, about 2 weeks after that coffee, when everything changed again. Junho had been at a bar, not to get drunk, but to avoid going home to an apartment that had felt different since Sujin, and because there was something about the particular kind of solitude you can find in a crowded bar that was better than the solitude of quiet rooms. He had 2 drinks. He did not drink more than that anymore. Not since the diagnosis. Not since the doctor sat across from him and described in careful language what his heart was doing and what it would eventually do. Emika picked him up at 11:30. They drove out of Mapo and north toward the river, and somewhere between one district and the next Junho said, "Stop here a moment." Emika pulled over on a stretch of road that ran alongside a park. It was dark and mostly empty, the way Seoul gets in the small hours on weeknights away from the entertainment districts. Trees pressed close to the fence on one side. The road ahead was clear in both directions. Junho got out and stood by the car, and the cold air hit him, and he put his hands in his pockets. His stomach was turning a little, the residual effect of 2 drinks on a medication schedule that did not particularly appreciate alcohol. He steadied himself. He looked at the road. Emika got out too and stood nearby. "You should go back in, sir," Emika said. He had been saying this for 15 years, in exactly this tone, the voice of a man who has offered advice enough times to know it will probably not be taken, but continues to offer it anyway because that is who he is. "This area is too quiet at night. Too isolated." "I know," Junho said. "I want to talk." Emika was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "About what?" "About what you said last week. About donors." Emika had said, during a drive that had turned into an unusually long conversation, that perhaps Junho should put his name on the transplant list. That perhaps there was nothing wrong with accepting a heart that someone no longer needed. Junho had not answered then. He was answering now. "I can't do it," he said. He was looking at the dark line of trees against the slightly lighter dark of the sky. "I understand the logic. I know a donor heart means someone who is already going to die. I know it's not the same as asking someone to die for me. I know that, but I can't make peace with it. I can't sit here and hope for someone to die so that I can keep going." "You are not hoping for someone to die," Emika said carefully. "You are hoping to live. Those feel the same to me right now." Emika was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. "My daughter is coming to visit next month. Did I tell you that?" "You did." Junho looked at him. "The one you haven't seen in 3 years, Emika said. He did not say it with bitterness. He said it with the particular weight of a man who has counted something for so long it has become a part of his breathing. She is coming. We're going to have lunch. She wants to see the apartment. He paused. I cleaned it 3 weeks ago. I keep checking that it's still clean. Junho looked at him. She's going to be glad to see you, Emika. I hope so. The older man's hands were in his jacket pockets. I missed a lot. You can't give that back. But you can, he stopped. Neither of them finished the sentence. The sound came from the trees. It was subtle at first. A shift in the quality of the silence, the small sounds that should be there, the wind in the branches, a distant car, replaced suddenly by a stillness that was not natural. Junho turned toward the trees. The first shot cracked the night open. It came from the left, from somewhere in the dark beyond the fence, and it hit the car door 6 inches from where Junho was standing. The second shot was already in the air before the echo of the first finished. Junho moved by instinct, dropping low, reaching for Emika, and he heard the sound a bullet makes when it finds a different target than the one intended. And he heard Emika make a sound that he would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. Emika went down slowly, the way tall things fall, not all at once. Junho caught him. He was on his knees on the cold road with his driver of 15 years in his arms, and he was pressing his hand against the wound and calling the name of every person he could call. And the trees were quiet again, the ambush already retreating back into the dark the way these things always did. There were 4 minutes between the first shot and the sirens. They were not enough. The burial was on a gray Tuesday. It was held at a church in the district where Emika Okafor had worshipped for the 3 years he had lived in Seoul. And the attendance was larger than most people expected, because Emika was the kind of man who had quietly meant a great deal to a large number of people without ever making a point of it. Junho sat in the second row, dressed in black, and did not look at the flowers around the casket because he already knew all the flowers by name and he had approved them himself, and he could not look at them right now. He had been looking at the front of the church for some time when he heard it. Crying. Not the subdued kind that funerals usually produced, the polite grief of people who are sad but conscious of the setting. This was something else entirely. This was the sound of someone who had lost a piece of themselves that they were not sure how to live without, and it was coming from across the aisle. He turned to look. She was in the third row on the other side, wearing a black dress and a head wrap that her hands kept touching, the way hands go to familiar things when the rest of the world is not familiar anymore. Her face was completely open with grief. She was not managing it or containing it. She was just in it, entirely and without defense. Junho looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at her face more carefully. At the shape of it. At something in the particular way she held herself even while crying. Something he had seen before, somewhere recent. Somewhere that made the back of his mind reach for a connection he was not yet prepared for. She looked up, the way people sometimes do when they can feel someone watching, and their eyes met across the aisle of the church. He watched her face move through something. Recognition, then confusion, then a different kind of recognition, the deeper kind, the kind where you are placing a face in a context that does not make sense yet and the wrongness of it hits you somewhere low in the stomach. She looked at him and then at the coffin and then back at him, and she said, barely audible, "You." Her name was Nellie Okafor. Her father's name was Emika Okafor. She had been raised in Lagos by her mother after her parents separated, and for 3 years her father had been a voice on the phone, a money transfer at the end of each month, a man she loved and needed and had not been able to get to because every time they planned a visit something had come up, and that something was always driving the CO family somewhere they needed to be. She had not known who drove the CO family. She had not known who the boss was. She stood outside the church after the service with her arms crossed against the cold, staring at the middle distance, and she felt him approach before she saw him. He stopped at a respectful distance. He did not touch her. He just stood there, the same way he had stood outside the alley that night, and the similarity of it made something flash painfully in her chest. He talked about you, Junho said finally. For 3 years, almost every time we spoke for any length of time. His daughter. How proud he was of her. How much he wanted her to see his apartment. Nellie's jaw was tight. Her eyes were dry now, the way they go after too much crying, dry and burning. He was killed driving for you. Yes. He was there because of you. Yes. She looked at him. That's all you have to say? No, he said. I have a great deal more to say. But I'm not going to say it here, today, when you are burying your father. When you are ready, I would like to say it properly. I owe you that much. She stared at him. The cold moved around them both. A few people from the service passed by, glancing at them without stopping. "Go home," Nellie said. Her voice was flat and quiet. "Just go home." He nodded. He left. She watched him walk to his car, watched it pull away from the curb, and then she turned back to the church door and stood there in the cold until someone came out and put a coat over her shoulders, and she realized she had been standing there for 10 minutes. He gave her a week. In that week he sent one message. It said, "I am here when you are ready. There is no pressure." She did not reply. He did not send another one. On the 8th day he went to her workplace. He arrived at noon with a takeaway container of the jollof rice from a Nigerian restaurant near Iriwan that his assistant had researched extensively, and he stood in the lobby of the company building and asked the receptionist to tell Nellie there was something for her. She came down to the lobby, saw him, and turned around. He went back the next day with a different thing. She accepted the package this time, not from him directly, from the receptionist, and sent back a message through the receptionist that said, "Please stop coming." He went back the day after that. On the 4th visit she came down to the lobby and stood in front of him with her arms crossed and her expression closed and said, "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said. "I am not here to get anything. I am here because I am responsible for what happened to your father, and I cannot make it right, but I refuse to pretend that I am not responsible." "Then feel responsible," she said. "From a distance." "I will," he said. "From whatever distance you need. But let me know that you are okay." She stared at him. "I'm fine. Are you?" Her jaw moved. She did not answer. He held out the thing he had brought. It was not food this time. It was a folder with documents inside it, and when she opened it reluctantly, she found that it contained the title to a fully furnished apartment in her name, in a building near Hongdae, lease paid for 3 years, utilities included. It also contained a bank account passbook for an account that had been opened in her name with an amount in it that made her throat close. "My driver served this family for 15 years, Junho said. "That is what 15 years earns. It is his. It is yours. I am not buying your forgiveness. I know money cannot do that. This is what he earned, and it belongs to his family, and you are his family." Nellie closed the folder. She held it against her chest. She was looking at a point somewhere past his shoulder, and she was very still, and he waited. "I don't forgive you," she said. "I know. You can't just show up here. I know that too." She looked at him then, directly, and for a moment her face showed something other than the flat, closed expression she had been carrying. Something complicated. Something tired and sad and angry all at once. And something else, something she buried quickly, that looked almost like the beginning of pain on his behalf. "Go away, Junho," she said. He nodded. He turned and walked out of the lobby. She stood there with the folder pressed against her chest and watched him go and did not call after him. What melted her heart, as these things often go, was not a grand gesture. It was a Wednesday, 6 weeks after the funeral, and Nellie was walking home from work in the rain because she had forgotten her umbrella, and the subway stop was 3 blocks from her new apartment, and it was raining the particular Seoul late autumn rain that is cold and fine and gets into your collar and your hair and stays there. She was at the crosswalk on the corner of her street when she heard someone behind her say, in careful, accented English, "Excuse me." She turned around. It was a child. He was perhaps 6 years old. He was standing on the pavement in the rain with a backpack that was probably waterproof, but he himself was not, wearing a soaked coat and holding a small umbrella that was inside out from the wind. He was looking up at her with the enormous solemn expression of a child who is lost but is determined not to cry. "Do you know the blue building?" he asked. He was saying it to her specifically, she realized, because she was the only person who had stopped. Everyone else on the wet street was moving. "My mother works there, and I was told to go there after school, and I don't remember which street." She looked around. She did not see any other adults paying attention. She crouched down to his level in the rain, which got her coat wet, but meant she could look at him properly. "What is your mother's name?" she asked. He told her. She did not know the name, but she helped him fix the umbrella, and she asked the street vendor on the corner, who knew the building and pointed them 2 streets over, and she walked the boy to the blue building, and waited while his mother came running out and gathered him up and turned to Nellie with the kind of relief on her face that is physical, that lives in the whole body, and grabbed both of Nellie's hands and said thank you so many times in Korean that Nellie lost count. She was still standing outside the blue building when a car pulled up to the curb. She looked at it. She looked at the window rolling down. Junho was in the back seat. He had clearly just been somewhere official. His coat was formal and his tie was still on. And he had the same look he always had in his car, looking at his phone, mind somewhere else. But he had looked up. He had seen her. And now he was looking at her standing in the rain outside this building with her coat soaked through and her hair darkened by the water. And his expression was doing the same thing it had done at the coffee shop. That almost thing. Except this time it went further. It became something open and warm and unguarded, just for one undefended moment, before he pulled it back. He did not say anything clever. He said, "Get in. I'll drive you." She looked at the rain. She looked at the 3 blocks between her and her apartment. She looked at him looking at her. She got in. They did not speak for the first minute. The car was warm and her coat was cold and wet, and she sat with her hands in her lap and looked forward. Then she said, "I don't actually forgive you yet." "I know," he said, "but I'm not angry today." He looked at her, just briefly from the side, a glance that lasted less than a second, but that she felt on her skin the way you feel a change in temperature. "Okay," he said, "that's not forgiveness. It's just not anger. I understand the difference." She looked at her wet coat sleeves. "Do you know what he told me in our last phone call? 2 weeks before he died." She paused. "He told me he was thinking about leaving the job, that he was tired of the hours and he wanted to be somewhere he could see me more. He said he had been thinking about it for 2 years, but something kept coming up." Junho was quiet. "He said his boss was a good man, but that working for good men could also trap you," she continued, "because you felt responsible for them." The car stopped in front of her building. She did not move immediately. The rain came down on the windows and the street lights made soft halos in the water, and the interior of the car was warm, and she was sitting close enough to him that she could see the small muscle in his jaw move. "Did he say anything else?" Junho asked. She looked at him. His face was difficult to read, as it usually was, but there was something in it now that she had not seen before. He looked like a man carrying something he did not know how to put down. "He said he loved his job," she said quietly. "He said no matter what, he never regretted it." Junho looked out the front window. He did not say anything, but she saw his hand in his lap close slowly and then open again, and she understood that he was doing the same thing she did when she was keeping something inside, and the recognition of it moved through her like something she did not have a name for yet. She got out of the car. She stood on the pavement and bent back to look in through the open door. "Next Tuesday," she said. "If you want to tell me everything properly, I'll hear it then." She shut the door and walked into her building and did not look back. But she stood in her building lobby for a full 30 seconds before pressing the elevator button, her hand flat against the wall, breathing. The Tuesday conversation lasted 4 hours. He told her everything. He told her about the ambush and who had ordered it and why, a faction within the broader network that had been circling him for years, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. He told her that Emeka had been in the wrong place because he was always in the right place, always exactly where he was needed, and that was the tragedy of men like Emeka Okafor. He told her about the night of the shooting with a detail and a precision that showed her he had gone over it many times in his own mind. The way you go over something you cannot change and cannot stop examining. She listened. She did not cry. She asked questions when she needed to, and she watched his face when he answered, and she believed him. Not all at once, but gradually, the way you believe something that shows you itself consistently over time. She told him more about her father. About the summers she had spent in Korea as a child, before the separation, before her mother took her back to Lagos. About the phone calls that had been their primary language for 3 years. About the lunch they had planned. "He was going to make me a egusi soup," she said. "He had been practicing. He sent me a video of himself cooking it. He got the ratio wrong, but he was so proud of it." Junho was looking at his hands on the table. "He showed me that video." She went still. "He showed you?" "He showed anyone who was in the car on that day. He was very proud of it." Junho looked up and his eyes met hers directly across the table. "He said you were going to love it even if it was terrible." Nellie pressed her lips together. She looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at him. "It would have been terrible," she said. "Yes," Junho said, and the almost smile came all the way out this time. It moved across his whole face. It changed everything about him, softened every sharp line, lit something behind his eyes, and it was so genuine and so rare and so entirely unguarded that Nellie felt it land in her chest with the weight of something significant. She looked away quickly. She looked at her coffee cup, and wrapped both hands around it and did not look back at him for a moment. When she did look back, he had composed himself again. But he was watching her, and he did not look away when she caught him at it. "I don't hate you," she said carefully. "I want you to know that. I was angry. I still am some of the time. But I don't hate you." "That is more than I expected," he said. "Don't push it," she said. He nodded seriously. "I won't." But his eyes stayed on her face a moment longer, and she let them, and neither of them said anything about that either. What came after that was slower than anything Nellie had expected. Slower than anything she would have predicted about a man like Junho, who moved through the world with a certainty and decisiveness that made rooms reorganize themselves. He was not decisive about her. He was careful. He called when he said he would call. He showed up where he said he would show up. He did not make promises he was not certain he could keep. He never turned up unannounced after she had asked him not to. When she said she needed a few days to herself, he gave her a week without contact. And when she was the one to reach out first, he did not mention the extra days. He took her to places she had never been in Seoul, not restaurants designed to impress, though he could have done that, but the kind of places a person goes when they actually know a city. A small museum in Insadong that specialized in traditional Korean papermaking. A market in Noryangjin that opened at 4 in the morning and sold fish so fresh they were still moving. A path along the Bukhansan Ridge that came out above the city on a clear November morning and showed her all of Seoul laid out below in the low winter sun. She stood on that ridge with her breath making clouds in the cold air and looked at the city and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. "I've been here 3 years," she said, "and I have never seen it from up here." Junho was standing a few feet away with his hands in his pockets. "Your father knew this path," he said. "He brought me here once, about 5 years ago. He said the city looked manageable from up here." She looked at the city. She thought about what manageable meant and what it felt like from the ground versus from above. She thought about her father standing on this same path looking down at the same city and what he had been thinking about. Then she turned and looked at Junho. He was looking at the city. His profile was clean against the pale sky. There was something about the way the cold light fell across his face that made him look younger than he usually did. Or perhaps more honest. The careful control he maintained in other settings softened here, on this ridge, in the open air. She did not say anything. Neither did he. But when they started back down the path, she walked close enough that their arms were nearly touching, and he adjusted his pace to stay level with her. And about halfway down the mountain his arm brushed hers, and neither of them moved away. They walked the rest of the way like that, arms touching, not holding hands, not leaning into each other, just allowing the contact, just that small margin of warmth between two people who were not yet ready to name what they were becoming. The first time he reached for her hand, it was in the kitchen of her apartment, 3 months after the burial. They were cooking, which had become a thing they did on Sunday evenings without ever formally declaring that it was a thing they did. She had been trying to teach herself her father's egusi soup recipe, the corrected version, with the right ratios, and Junho had been recruited as someone with a large enough kitchen and a complete set of utensils. It had migrated to her apartment when she got a proper kitchen of her own. The soup was ready and she was turning off the stove, and he was beside her passing the ladle, and his hand brushed hers, and he stopped. He did not move. He did not pull away. He was very still. She looked up at him. He was looking at their hands. Then he looked at her face, and the distance between them was small, just the width of a breath, and she could see the deliberateness in his expression, the decision being made. He said very quietly, "Is this all right?" She looked at him for a long moment, at the careful, deliberate stillness of him, at the question in his eyes that he had the patience to actually wait for the answer to, at the way he was asking, not assuming, not moving, simply asking and meaning it. "Yes," she said. He turned his hand over, slowly, and held hers properly, his fingers warm and steady around hers. And they stood in the kitchen with the soup steaming on the stove and the evening quiet outside the window, and neither of them moved for a while. She could feel his pulse in his palm. She was not sure he knew that. She was not sure she was going to tell him. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. There was an evening 2 weeks after that when they were washing dishes after dinner, and she handed him a bowl, and when he took it his fingers closed over hers on the rim, and he held them there, just for a moment, not taking the bowl, just holding her hand around it, and he looked at her from the side and she felt it travel from her hand up through her whole arm. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then he smiled, the real one, the one she had first seen at the coffee table, and he took the bowl and put it on the rack and said nothing. She turned back to the sink and stared at the running water for a moment. She was in trouble. She knew it. She was in very specific, warm, slow-arriving trouble, and she was not entirely unhappy about it. He took her to a jazz bar in Hongdae one Friday evening, a narrow underground room with low lights and small tables, and a trio playing something that moved slowly through the air like warm water. They sat across from each other with drinks on the table between them, and the music doing what music does in small rooms late at night. She was watching the pianist when she felt his eyes on her. She turned and looked at him, and he did not look away. He was watching her the way he sometimes watched her when he thought she was not paying attention, with an openness that he kept more guarded in other moments. There was something in his face that she had been cataloging for weeks, adding to a collection of expressions she was slowly learning to read, and this one she now knew. This was him letting her see him, deliberately, the way you turn a light on in a room you have kept dark for a long time. "What?" she said softly under the music. "Nothing," he said. "I was just looking." "You do that," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not apologize for it. She looked at him for a moment, and then looked back at the pianist. But she was smiling now, the small private kind, the kind she did not perform for anyone. His hand was on the table between them, relaxed and open, fingers slightly spread. She moved her hand across the table slowly and placed it over his. She did not look at him when she did it. She just put her hand over his, and they sat like that for the rest of the song. When the song ended, he turned his hand over under hers and laced his fingers through hers properly, and she finally looked at him, and the expression on his face, the full warmth of it, the complete absence of his usual guard, did something to her she was not prepared for. She looked away first. Her heart was doing things she was choosing not to announce. What they were to each other grew in the spaces between the things they did, in the Sunday evenings and the long drives and the phone calls after midnight when one of them could not sleep, in the way he made room for her opinions and decisions that were ostensibly his alone, in the way she started to know his face well enough to read the things he did not say, in the stolen glances across rooms when they thought the other was not looking, in the way he touched the small of her back when they walked into rooms together, just lightly, just briefly, just enough that she felt it for a full minute after. In the way she sometimes reached for his hand under tables, and he always turned his palm up to meet her before she got there. She met his inner circle gradually. First Taeyong, his cousin, who regarded her with the polite wariness of a man performing a risk assessment, but eventually arrived at what she recognized as genuine warmth. Then Byung-chul, his uncle, who said nothing for the entire first dinner, and then sent her flowers the following week with a card that said you are better than he deserves, which means you are very good indeed. She kept the card on her kitchen counter. She watched the way Junho moved in his world, the weight he carried that he did not acknowledge, the decisions that came across his desk and what they sometimes cost, not in money, but in sleep, in stillness, in the extra cups of cold coffee that accumulated on his desk when he was working through something difficult. She asked him once, in the dark of an early morning when they were sitting on the floor of her living room with the lights off and the city visible through the window, "Does it ever feel like too much?" He thought about it seriously, which was how he treated all her questions. "Sometimes," he said, "when people die because of decisions I made, when I can see the right path and not enough people will follow me on it." He paused. He turned to look at her in the dark. "Less now." She looked at him. "Less now," he repeated, and his eyes stayed on her face when he said it so that she understood exactly what he meant. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her and pressed his lips briefly to the top of her head, a quiet, unhurried thing. And they sat like that in the dark with the city lights spread out before them, and neither of them needed to say anything more. Then the threats came back. They were subtle at first. A message to one of his lieutenants. A meeting that went wrong in a way that felt manufactured. Two of his allied families withdrew from a joint arrangement without explanation within the same week. Junho tracked the pattern, and the pattern led back to the same faction that had ordered the roadside ambush, consolidated now, bolder, testing how much the organization had shifted since that night. He did not tell Nellie immediately. He told his security team, and he told Taeyong, and he increased the coverage around the people he cared about without announcing it. She noticed the car that started appearing outside her building. "There's someone watching my apartment," she told him over the phone. "I know," he said. "That's my car." She was quiet for a moment. "How long has it been there?" 3 weeks. "Junho. I was going to tell you." I didn't want to alarm you before I had more information. You should have told me. You're right. I should have. She pressed her lips together. She was standing by her window looking down at the car in question. How bad is it? He was quiet for a beat too long. Tell me, she said. It's manageable, he said. I need you to trust me on that. Tell me what manageable means. It means I am handling it, he said. It means I am not going to let anything happen to you. It means I need 2 weeks and a few difficult conversations, and it will be resolved. And if it isn't, then I will find another way. She turned away from the window. She paced the length of her living room. She thought about what she had signed up for when she had started walking toward this man, and she thought about what it meant to truly know what someone's world looked like and to stay in it anyway. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he confirmed. There was a pause on the line, and then he said more quietly, Are you okay? I'm okay, she said. Are you? Another pause. I'm better when I can see you. She stood in the middle of her living room with the phone against her ear and looked at nothing. Come over after your meeting tomorrow, she said. Yes, he said simply. The betrayal came from inside. It was one of his own men, a lieutenant named Park Cheol, who had been with the family for 6 years and who had decided, at some point in the last year, that his best future lay not with Junho, but with the faction that opposed him. It was Cheol who had provided the location of the roadside stop that night 10 months ago. It was Cheol who had been feeding information outward for months, feeding them the schedule, the route, the timing. When Junho found out, he was in a meeting. He found out because Taeyong, who had been running a quiet parallel investigation, put a folder on the table in front of him without saying a word, and Junho opened it and read it and closed it again. He dismissed the room. He sat alone for about 20 minutes. Then he handled it. He did not handle it the way some men in his position would have. He gathered the necessary evidence, presented it to the council, and removed Cheol from the organization with a precision and a finality that sent a clear message to the faction testing him without escalating the conflict into open war. He negotiated instead a territorial arrangement that cost him something but cost the opposing faction more, and that concluded with both sides recognizing a line that would hold for long enough to matter. The car outside Nellie's building left after 18 days. He showed up at her door on the 19th day with food from the restaurant in Noryangjin, packed in cold containers. She opened the door and looked at him. He was tired. She could see it in the way he was holding himself, not the usual collected stillness, but something slightly looser. The posture of a man who had been managing something enormous for weeks and had just put it down. 18 days, she said. I said 2 weeks. I was 2 days over. You were. I apologize for the 2 days. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and let him in and took the food containers from his arms and put them on the kitchen counter. She turned around and he was standing just inside the door, and she crossed the room and put her arms around him and held on. He was still for 1 second, the way he always was for that first second, and then his arms came around her and he held her back with a tightness that told her more than anything he had said on the phone about how difficult the last 18 days had actually been. Thank you, he said into her hair. For what? She said against his shoulder. For being here. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. She was in love with him by December. She knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. She knew it in the way she looked for his face first when she walked into rooms. She knew it in the way his voice on the phone settled something in her that nothing else settled. She knew it in the way she thought about him in the quiet moments, not dramatically, not with longing, but with the simple, solid warmth of someone who has become necessary. She did not tell him in December. She told him in February, on a night when they had been sitting on the bench by the Han Gang and the city was cold and clear, and he had said something quietly funny about the couple ahead of them on the path, and she had laughed, and he had turned to look at her face while she laughed, and the expression on his own face was something she did not have a word for in any of her 3 languages. She stopped laughing. She looked at him looking at her. I love you, she said, because it was true and because she was tired of carrying it alone. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said, and then, before she could react to that, I have loved you for longer than I have known what to do with it. She stared at him. That is an extremely strange way to say it back. I know. He turned toward her on the bench and took her face in both hands, carefully, with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, and looked at her the way you look at something you have been protecting for a long time and are only now allowing yourself to fully acknowledge. I love you, Nellie. I have for a very long time. And the door of the cafe opened and a woman walked in. Nellie had never met Sujin before. She knew what she looked like from a photograph she had seen once, accidentally, on Junho's phone. She was tall, Korean, with the kind of maintained elegance that spoke of money and habit. She was with two friends, but she was not paying attention to them. She was looking at Nellie. She sat down 2 tables over, and she looked at Nellie with the particular expression of someone who has prepared themselves for a confrontation and is deciding exactly how to begin. "You're Nellie," she said, not as a question. Nellie put her cup down. "I am." Sujin's friends were quiet. Bomi went still beside Nellie. "He didn't tell you," Sujin said slowly. "I can see it in your face. He didn't tell you." She tilted her head. "He's dying. He has a heart condition. He has months left, maybe less depending on how the medication is going. The doctor told him a year ago that without a transplant—" She stopped. She looked at Nellie's face, and something in her own expression shifted, some expected satisfaction that did not arrive. "I'm sorry," she said, and she sounded like she meant it and was surprised by it. "He should have told you himself." She stood, picked up her bag, said something to her friends in Korean, and left. Nellie sat very still. Bomi said her name softly. She said, "Give me a minute." She went to him that evening. He opened the door and took one look at her face and understood that she knew. He stepped back and let her in without speaking. She stood in the middle of his living room and looked at him. "How long?" she asked. "A year ago, the initial diagnosis. 4 to 7 months was the estimate they gave without treatment. The treatment has been slowing the progression." "Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I first met you, it was none of your business. When we became friends, I didn't want it to change what you saw when you looked at me. When I fell in love with you," he stopped. He looked at her directly. "When I fell in love with you, I was afraid." She stared at him. "You were afraid?" "Yes. You face mafia factions and power politics, and you were afraid to tell me you were ill." "Those things I know how to manage," he said. "This I did not know how to manage." She looked at him for a long time. At the careful, tired, controlled face of the man she loved, standing in his own living room telling her the truth after months of carrying it alone. She was angry. She was. She would be angry about it for a long time. But underneath the anger was something else, something that looked at him and saw the fear he had just admitted to and knew that for a man like Junho, admitting fear to another person was the largest thing he was capable of giving. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes. I needed to know." "Yes. You do not get to decide what information I need to make my choices." "You are right. I am sorry." She crossed the room and she put her arms around him and she held on, not gently, tightly, the way you hold something you are not ready to lose. And he was still for a second, and then his arms came around her and he pressed his face against her hair and she felt him exhale, long and slow. "Are you actually getting better?" she asked, into his shoulder. "The doctors believe so. The treatment is working better than expected." "Are you lying to me right now?" "No." She pulled back just enough to look at his face. She searched it, every part of it, the way she had learned to read him over months of studying this face that he kept so carefully arranged. "Okay," she said. "Okay. But from now on you tell me everything. Every appointment. Every update. Every single thing the doctor says." "Yes," he said. "I mean it. I know you mean it." She looked at him one more moment, and then she pulled him back in, and he held her with a care that was also desperation. The way you hold someone when you are afraid of what the world might do with them. And they stood in the quiet of his apartment for a long time. He asked her to marry him in April. He did not do it at a restaurant with a ring in a champagne glass. He did not arrange an elaborate scenario. He did it in her kitchen on a Sunday evening, while they were washing the dishes from the agusi soup she had finally gotten right, the first time she had made it perfectly, and he had eaten 2 full bowls of it, and she was quietly triumphant about this, and had been making small comments about it for the last 20 minutes. He put down the dish he was drying. He turned to look at her. She was still at the sink, rinsing, her back half to him, her natural hair loose and unpinned the way she wore it on Sunday evenings, still talking about how her ratios had finally been correct, still savoring the victory of it. "Nellie," he said. I want to ask you something." She turned off the tap and turned around. She looked at his face and immediately looked more carefully. He was holding a ring. It was simple, clean, a single stone, clearly chosen by someone who knew how she dressed and how she moved and what she preferred. He was holding it with both hands, steadily, but she could see that his hands were not entirely still, just slightly, just enough to tell her something about what this was costing him to do. "I know the timing is not perfect," he said. I know this year has been what it has been. I know I kept things from you that I should have told you. I know the world I come from is not simple." He stopped. He looked at her with his whole face open, no armor, no management, just him. "I know all of those things. And I am still standing here asking you this because you are the person I want beside me. Every day. For however long every day lasts." He paused. "Will you marry me?" She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at his slightly unsteady hands. She thought about everything that had brought them to this kitchen on this Sunday, with the soup pot on the stove and the windows fogged from the steam and the small mess of a life they had built together scattered through this apartment. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. He held her hand for a moment, looking at it, and she felt him exhale, the long, slow exhale of a man who has been holding his breath for longer than he knew. Then she put her arms around his neck, and he lifted her slightly off the ground. Not dramatically, just a little, just enough, and she laughed against his shoulder, and he held her like that for a long moment, her feet off the floor and his face against her neck, and the city outside doing its indifferent city things. When he put her down, he was small by the standards of the world Junho occupied, which still meant 90 people in a rooftop garden in Songbuk, with the mountains visible in the distance and the evening sky going pink above them. She wore ivory, and her head wrap was made from the same fabric as her mother's wedding cloth, a detail her mother had sent from Lagos in a parcel that had arrived 3 weeks early, and that Nellie had cried over for 30 minutes before collecting herself. The ceremony was good, and the dinner was good, and Byung-chul's speech made several large men in expensive suits cry, which Nellie filed away permanently and intended to bring up at every appropriate occasion for the rest of her life. And then the night settled, and the guests drifted away, and she was in the suite that had been arranged for them, sitting at the dressing table taking down her head wrap, and Bomi came in to help her, and Bomi had the expression of someone carrying information and not being sure what to do with it. "What's wrong?" Nellie asked. "Nothing is wrong," Bomi said carefully. "But there is something you should know. And I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from anyone else, because I know you, and I know how you process things, and I want you to process this with time before you react." Nellie put down the pin in her hand. She turned to look at Bomi fully. Bomi sat down across from her. "He had the surgery," she said. 6 weeks ago. He didn't tell you because he said he was going to tell you himself tonight. He has been healthy. The transplant worked." She paused. "Nellie," she stopped again. "Say it," Nellie said. "The heart belonged to your father." The room was completely silent. Nellie looked at Bomi. She looked at her friend's face, at the careful distress in it, at the way Bomi was watching her the way you watch someone standing near the edge of something. She stood up. She walked out of the dressing room and into the main room of the suite, and Junho was there, standing near the window, already changed out of his wedding clothes, and he turned when she came in. He looked at her face. He already knew she knew. "You knew," she said. "You knew, and you married me tonight without telling me. I was going to tell you tonight. I have been trying to find the way to. My father's heart is beating in your chest," she said. The words were flat and strange in her mouth. "My father died in your service, and his heart kept you alive, and you have known this, and you did not tell me." "Nellie, don't." She held up her hand. "Don't talk right now." He stopped. She stood in the middle of the room with her wedding dress and her bare shoulders and her hands shaking slightly, and she looked at him, and she thought about her father's voice on the phone and the video of the agusi soup and the apartment he had cleaned 3 weeks in advance for a daughter he would never see again. And she thought about the man standing in front of her who was alive because of that father, and she could not find the beginning of the feeling she was inside of. "I need to not be here right now," she said. She went back into the dressing room, and she sat on the floor, and she did not cry and she did not speak, and Bomi sat with her and said nothing, which was the right thing to do. She stayed at Bomi's apartment for 4 days. Junho did not come. He sent one message on the first day that said, "I am here when you are ready. There is something you need to see. But only when you are ready." She did not reply. On the 4th day, Bomi said carefully over breakfast, "There is a thing I know. And I want to tell you, not to push you toward anything, but because you deserve to have all the information." Nellie looked at her. "His father has a video," Bomi said. "It is your father in the hospital. After the shooting. The wound was, Nellie, the bullet did what it did to him, and there was no recovering from it. The doctor said so. His father sat with your father in the hours before the end, and your father, knowing what was happening, asked them to consider the donation. He knew Junho was ill. He had known for months. Junho told him. Nellie stared at the table. Junho told your father? She said. He told him about 4 months before the shooting. Your father asked directly on a long drive. They talked for hours. And your father? Bomi stopped. She pressed her lips together. Your father said that if anything ever happened to him, and if they were a match, he wanted it to go to Junho. He put it in writing in the hospital. The video is him saying it in his own words. They did not take anything. Your father gave it. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, Seoul was going about its morning. Nellie sat with her hands flat on the table and breathed. She went to the Seo family house on a Thursday afternoon. She had never been to the main house before. It was in the northern part of the city, a traditional-style building with a walled garden that was very old and very well-maintained. Junho's father, Seo Kwang-min, met her at the gate. He was a man in his late 60s who moved slowly and looked at her with an expression of someone who had been prepared for this meeting for a long time and had not known when it would come. He did not shake her hand. He bowed to her deeply, with a respect that was not ceremonial. She bowed back. They went inside. He showed her the video on a tablet in a quiet sitting room with tea she did not drink and afternoon light coming through paper screens. He played it once without commentary. He offered to play it again. She said no. She sat very still for a long time after. Then she said, in the careful Korean she had been building for 3 years, he did this himself. No one pressured him. No one, Kwang-min said. He asked me to make sure you knew one day if it came to it. He wanted you to know it was his choice. She looked at the tablet. At the still image it had returned to after the video ended. Her father's face. Hospital lights. His hands folded on the blanket, and his voice coming through the speaker, strong and clear and absolutely certain, saying the thing he had decided to say. She recognized him in it. She recognized his particular brand of quiet, stubborn love, the love that showed itself in actions rather than speeches, in decisions rather than declarations. She recognized the man who had sent her money every month for 3 years and cleaned his apartment 3 weeks in advance and practiced a gusi soup until he got it wrong in the right direction. She put her hand over her mouth. She closed her eyes. Kwang-min said nothing. He waited. When she opened her eyes, she looked at him and said, "Where is Junho?" He was in the garden. He was sitting on a stone bench near the far wall where a persimmon tree was beginning its spring growth, his elbows on his knees, looking at the ground. He heard her footsteps on the path, and he looked up. She stopped a few feet away from him. He stood slowly. He did not reach for her. He stood and waited, and his face had the look of a man who has said everything he knows how to say, and is now just waiting for what the world decides to do with it. He looked like he had not slept well in 4 days. He looked like those 4 days had cost him something he could not calculate. She walked up to him, and she pressed her ear against his chest. She listened. His heartbeat was steady, strong, unhurried. The same rhythm she had felt many times before, in the dark of early mornings and in the quiet of the kitchen, and in the spaces where people stop pretending and simply exist beside each other. His arms came around her. She stayed there for a long time. "He knew you," she said eventually. "He knew what you were. He knew the man you are. And he made a choice." Junho's arms tightened slightly. "I wanted you to live," she said. "I have wanted you to live since before I knew I loved you. I just didn't know how much it had already cost." She pulled back enough to look at his face. "You should have told me." "Yes," he said. "I know. I was afraid that if I told you, you would never be able to look at me without seeing him. And he stopped. "I need you to see me." She looked at him, at the full, open, unguarded face of him, the face she had spent a year learning. "I see you," she said. He exhaled. She put her hand flat on his chest, over his heart, and held it there. She felt his heartbeat against her palm, steady and real and present, and she thought about her father's face in the video, certain and decided, and she thought about the kind of love that looks like a decision made quietly in the last hours of a life. He covered her hand with his. His eyes were very bright. "Thank you," she said softly, and she was not talking to Junho alone. He understood. He put his forehead down against hers, and they stood like that in the garden with the persimmon tree above them, and the spring air around them, and 4 difficult days, and everything before them slowly releasing its grip. They went home after that. Their home. The apartment they had gradually filled with the evidence of their life together, her books on his shelves, his cold coffee cups on her kitchen counter, 2 toothbrushes, Sunday soup, the small accumulated weight of 2 people who have decided on each other. Life did not become simple. That was not the nature of the world Junho occupied, and she knew it now, fully, with clear eyes. There were meetings she did not attend, and things she did not ask about, and things he told her because she had asked him to tell her everything. And she had to learn which of those things required her worry, and which ones he was handling, and how to tell the difference. They argued, sometimes loudly. She had a tendency to go quiet when she was truly furious, a deep and articulate quiet that he found more unsettling than anything shouted. And he had a tendency to retreat into the careful, controlled manner that she now knew was not coldness but self-protection. And when both of those things happened simultaneously, the apartment got very still. But they always found their way back. There was an evening, 2 months after the garden, when they had argued badly about something that mattered and then gone quiet, and hours had passed in separate rooms. And she came to find him finally, sitting at his desk with the cold coffee and the unread papers. And she stood in the doorway and he looked up, and neither of them said anything for a moment. She crossed the room. She sat on the edge of his desk and looked at him. He reached out and took her hand. That was all. That was enough. They sat there in the quiet of the study with their hands held, and the argument still in the air around them, but both of them choosing this over that, choosing each other over the distance. And that was the truest thing about them. Their son was born on a February morning, 22 months after the wedding, in a hospital room that had too many flowers in it, because Byung-chul had sent 3 separate arrangements, and they had all arrived at once. He was a small, loud, immensely opinionated person from the first moment. He had Nellie's eyes and Junho's hands and her mother's nose, which she announced to Junho with a triumph that was entirely disproportionate to the situation. He cried for the first 15 minutes of his life with a determination that suggested he had a great many feelings about having arrived and was not going to keep them to himself. Junho held him in the way first-time fathers hold new babies, with the particular combination of absolute terror and absolute wonder that is only available in that specific moment. And Nellie watched her husband's face from the hospital bed and saw the armor come completely off, just for a moment, just for long enough. She named him Daesung Emikaseo. Daesung because it meant great star, and because her father had believed in reaching for things. Emika because her father's name would live in her son's name and travel forward in time the way names carry people through the world after their bodies cannot. Seo because he was also Junho's son, entirely and completely, and that was not a fact that needed to be negotiated. Junho held the baby and looked at Nellie and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, Emikaseo. Yes, she said. He looked at her with his son in his arms and the armor entirely gone from his face, and she thought, not for the first time, that this was the truest version of him she had ever seen. Thank you, he said. For the name. For everything carried in the name. She held out her arms. He brought the baby to her carefully and sat on the edge of the bed beside her and pressed his lips to her temple, slowly, and she leaned into it, and they looked down together at this small, loud, brand new person, and she felt something she did not have a word for, enormous and quiet at the same time. The feeling of a life that has found its right shape after a long time of searching for it. 2 years after that, Nellie sat on the floor of their living room with Daesung, who was learning to walk and treated each successful step as a personal triumph of historic proportions, and their daughter Ngozi, who was 4 months old and asleep in the carrier strapped to Nellie's chest. Junho was in the kitchen making coffee, and she could hear him talking softly to himself, probably about the coffee. He had opinions about coffee that he stated aloud even when alone. Outside the window, Seoul was doing a slow Saturday morning in the particular way it had in late spring, unhurried and warm. The kind of morning that feels like a gift because no one has declared it special. Daesung took 4 steps across the floor. He looked at his mother with an expression of total incredulity that he had done this, and she burst into applause, and he fell over with the surprise of it, and then laughed at himself, lying on his back on the floor. And she scooped him up and kissed his forehead, and Ngozi stirred against her chest. Junho came in from the kitchen with 2 cups. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the 3 of them, his son on his wife's lap and his daughter on her chest, and his wife's face bright with the morning and the laughter, and something passed through his expression that he did not try to manage or contain. He let it stay on his face. He came and sat on the floor beside her. He handed her the coffee. She passed Daesung to him. The boy climbed his father with the confidence of someone who has never once been dropped, and Junho held him and looked at Nellie over the top of his son's head. She looked back. Something passed between them in that look, the whole long story of them, The alley and the coffee shop and the burial and the ridge and the kitchen and the hanging bench and the wedding night and the garden and all the Sunday evenings and all the midnights and all the arguments and the returns from them. All of it, in one look. She reached over and put her hand on his arm, and he turned his hand over without looking down, and their fingers laced together, and Daesung put both small hands on his father's face and demanded his full attention. And Ngozi made a small sound against Nellie's chest. And the city outside the window did its Saturday things and did not particularly notice the four of them on the floor of that warm room. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most amount of enough that either of them had ever had, and they had earned every single piece of it. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Every single one of you who stayed from that alley in the opening to this living room floor. I see you and I appreciate you more than you know. Now I need to hear from you in the comments. Who do you think was right and who was wrong? Did Junho go too far by keeping the truth from Nellie not once but twice? Was Emeka Okafor the real hero of this entire story? And what moment hit you hardest? Was it the burial where she saw him across the aisle? The kitchen where he asked, "Is this all right?" The bench by the Hongang? Or that garden scene where she put her ear against his chest and listened? Tell me everything. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me which part you loved the most. This comment section belongs to you, and I read every single one. If this story moved you, please give it a like because it helps more people find it. Share it with someone who needs a story that earns its ending. And if you are not yet subscribed to Afro-Korean Mafia series by Jasmine, this is your sign. There are more stories coming and none of them will let you go easily. Thank you for being here. Always.